In 2019, me, my boyfriend, my best friend, and her partner stayed at an Airbnb in Sandusky, Ohio for a convention. There were several red flags about that place, but it was much cheaper than the hotel near the convention hall, so we opted for there. The first red flag happened as soon as we arrived, that his house was directly next door. As in, if there weren't any trees, we would have been able to see into their windows of where we were staying. Okay, so he had a few houses on his property, no big deal, right? Wrong. It only got worse from here. Per instruction, we were forbidden to go into the basement under any circumstance unless there was a tornado. Being the curious young adults we were, we opened the door anyway and were going to investigate, but stopped in our tracks as soon as we saw the direction the stairs were facing, directly towards the owner's home. In the darkness, there was a faint electronic glow. We quickly shut the door and barricaded it with luggage. Again, the owner's home was so close, there could have easily been something connecting his house to the basement. A little weirded out at this point, we went and looked at the rest of the house. It was a nice and spacious place with a narrow staircase to the second floor where our bedrooms would be. We selected our rooms and began to unwind after a long drive. In my boyfriend and I's room, there was a single random sprinkler in the middle of the ceiling that looked out of place. We were tired from the trip, so I didn't think much of it then. But looking back now, there's a high chance it was a hidden camera. Things only got weirder from here. We were gone most of the next day at the convention, and when we returned, one of the outside doors that we definitely locked was unlocked and slightly ajar. My friends and I collectively shared a look of panic and closed and locked the door. My best friend's partner suggested that maybe the owner needed to get something out of there while we were gone and didn't close the door completely on the way out. We made sure all our things were still there and then soon forgot about it because we discovered something more pressing. The locks on both the bedroom doors were now ineffective. We told ourselves that they were already like that and we just didn't notice. But I'm not sure if I believe that. On our second to the last night, my boyfriend and I were both restless over what had been happening at the Airbnb and also the day's activities. So we decided to try to find something to watch on TV to take our minds off of it. We were flipping through the channels on the TV when suddenly we came across a Windows 10 lock screen and no computer in sight. I opened the cabinets and looked around trying to find a computer. The dresser the TV was on was too heavy to move to look behind, but seeing where the wires were positioned, they could have very well gone through the wall and into the basement. We were too frightened to see the basement for ourselves to confirm or deny our suspicions of surveillance and owner interference, and who knows what else. And needless to say, we left as quickly as possible the last day there and didn't look back.
This story happened to me very recently, and I've held off on writing it specifically because I wanted to be able to write it when I had a level head. Anyway, here's my story. My dad moved to Texas last week and asked if I was available to help him out because he had back problems. Being an 18, almost 19-year-old guy in college in an entirely different state with a job definitely made me a busy kid, but I asked my boss about it and she thankfully let me go help him out. When I got to the house, it was literally just a bunch of boxes, but I didn't mind. Only thing I cared about was whether or not I had a chair, a desk, and internet, so I was able to do some college work. Bad news, I didn't. Solution: go into my dad's work office. So the day after I arrived to help out, my dad took me into his office, though he was more interested in me impressing all of his coworkers than sending me off to do my assignments. I met everybody, and after about 20 minutes of conversation, I was finally able to take off and completed everything that needed finishing. Thankfully, I didn't have a mother load since college had recently just started, but I was definitely grateful to get it done. When I finished, I looked at the clock and it was only noon. I groaned, knowing I was going to be there for at least another 3 hours, so I went to tell my dad I was going on a walk. As soon as I got outside, I was extremely excited. My dad's office was right next to a forest, my favorite place to walk. It's quiet, and generally speaking, I feel at peace when I'm by myself. I walked for about 30 minutes, I'd say, when I started hitting people's backyards. None of these backyards were connected, though. I'd have to walk almost another 3 to 5 minutes before seeing another one. And I'd like to note that all of them were fenced off. It was about the 7th or 8th house when I found a creek. Score, is what I thought to myself, but when I took one more step forward, I began to get barked at by a German Shepherd. I hate dogs, mainly because they hate me. They're never friendly with me, and even my own dog never liked me. Bit me so hard once it popped multiple veins on my arm. But I digress. This dog was going ballistic, so I simply walked away to the other side of the creek, where I could still hear it, but not as bad. I skipped rocks for about 20 minutes, with the dog still barking, mind you, so I figured it was time to pack it up and start heading back. I picked up a rock to toss and scare the dog on the way back, as I walked back across the creek and by the dog again, once again making it go insane, but stopped when I heard a voice call the dog, making it shut up immediately. Thank God, I thought. No need to do it myself. I kept on walking until I heard someone call out, "Hey, you!" making me turn around. I was looking at a 5'10" man, getting close to the end of his 40s, I'd say, probably 15 feet away from me holding a shotgun. He asked me what I was doing on his property. I was so confused. I told him that his property was clearly gated and I was just enjoying the scenery of the forest. I specifically remember him saying, "I will not allow trespassers on my land. Get over here," as he started to walk near me. I told him, "I'm leaving now anyway, goodbye." But this guy wasn't having it. The next thing to happen blows my mind. As I turned around and began to walk away, I hear a buckshot ring out. I turn around to see the man pointing his gun right at me, with his finger motioning for me to come to him. This guy was nuts. I knew that now, so I followed his commands. I was shitting bricks. I've never been held at gunpoint before, but I knew that if this guy got his hands on me, I was in deep shit. So as soon as he began lowering his gun, I did what I know could have been the stupidest thing I'd ever done in my life, and threw the rock that was meant for the dog straight at him. It hit his gun, knocking it out of his hands, giving me enough time to hit the ground running straight back from where I came, this time specifically behind some trees. I got a solid 200 feet until I heard a dog's bark in the distance. I turned around to see this dog run out of this guy's gate and making a beeline for me. Remember what I said about distance being between each house? Yeah, that detail comes in right about now. I whipped back around and saw the neighbor's fence in sight. I didn't have any other choice, so I sprinted right toward it and hopped it as quick as I could. As I flopped over the fence and hit the ground, I was safe to catch my breath now, and after about 10 seconds, the dog reached the other side of the fence. I quickly walked up to this person's back porch and slammed on their back door as hard as I could. You ever seen Halloween? You know when the girl is being chased by Michael and the people don't open their door? Yeah, that happened to me. I can only assume the owner wasn't home because nobody answered. After that, I quickly turned back to where I just ran from to see the man walking toward me, with his gun still in his hands, yelling something at me that I couldn't make out because of the barking dog. I was in a fight or flight state of mind now, so I hopped back over the fence and took a swing at the dog. To my surprise, it actually jumped back and just growled at me, and that's when I realized how lucky I was. This dog was all bark and no bite. I took this opportunity to my fullest, turning around and shooting into the forest at full speed again. I kept running for about 3 minutes until I found train tracks that led me to a road. Once I hit the road, I walked back to my dad's office so shaken up that I had to go throw up in the toilet before going to see him in his company's studio. I couldn't find him because he was out talking to his boss, so I walked out into the parking lot and called my sister as I broke out in tears. After finishing the call, I walked back into my dad's office until it was time to go. No, I haven't told my dad yet, mainly because he probably wouldn't believe me, and even if he did, what would we do? This guy was in a place neither of us know, and if I actually was on his property, though I'm fairly certain I wasn't, I would most likely be the one at fault. So as of now, I'm no longer going into the forest for a while. And to the guy with the dog and the shotgun, fuck you.
When I was 14, I was asked to babysit my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1, in an extremely rural or mountainous part of Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle had a wedding to go to over an hour away and wouldn't be back until very late. Their house was situated on a steep mountainside. Their back deck had a 15-foot drop onto a rocky hill below, leading down to a river. Their closest neighbors were about half a mile away. The closest main road was a mile away, and at night, there were no lights to be seen anywhere around them. Basically, it was in the middle of nowhere, and you would have to know where you're going to get there. You don't just accidentally end up there. My aunt and uncle left us with some pizza and their cell phone number next to their landline. This was the early 2000s, and I didn't have a cell phone, but even if I did, I wouldn't get reception there anyway. And then they headed out. The baby was already asleep. The 4-year-old wasn't feeling well and was quietly watching TV in the living room as he dozed off. And the 8-year-old was playing Guitar Hero with me up on the loft. The loft overlooked the living room to the left, where I could keep an eye on the 4-year-old, and there was a huge window that overlooked the driveway to the right. This description of the driveway is an important detail to the story. The road that led to their house ran straight into their forked driveway. It was a dead-end road. The house was as far as you could go. Go to the left driveway. There's a large open carport, and that's where my aunt and uncle and anyone who ever visited parked. The right driveway led down a very short but very steep hill to a large leveled-out area and ended against the garage door that opened to the basement of the house. It was never used as a garage, but served as my uncle's man cave and where he spent most of his time. Right beside the garage door, a normal door with a window so you could see right in. But this driveway was exclusively used by the kids as a play area because it was the only flat yard-like area on the property, and being on a mountainside, there isn't much room to safely play otherwise. No cars ever drove down there, like ever. There are too many toys and bikes in the way, and friends and family knew this. It was about 10 p.m., pitch black outside, no moon to illuminate the area either. My cousin and I were still playing Guitar Hero when headlights caught the corner of my eye. And not my aunt's minivan headlights. Huge truck headlights with those roof lights you often see on Jeeps or other off-road trucks. Not only that, the truck was going down the right driveway, the kids' play area. This was not my aunt and uncle. This was not anyone they knew. Panic and dread filled my body. I was a small teenage girl, alone, in an isolated house on a mountain at night with 3 children in my care. In a terrified voice, I asked my cousin, "Who is that? Jake, do you know whose truck that is?" And then he looked panicked. "No, I've never seen that truck before," he replied. I quickly ushered him downstairs, still unsure what to do, but the 2 little ones were sleeping down there, and I wanted to make sure they were safe. I checked on the baby, then grabbed the phone to call 911, and then I started to hear the metal garage door being shaken violently. No one ever opened that garage door. More panic fills me, and I hear them trying the door beside it, the metal doorknob jiggling. No one was actually knocking. It's not like they were checking to see if my uncle was down there. Plus, the lights were out. It was dark down there. They knew no one was down there. They were definitely breaking in. The door leading to the basement steps was right next to the phone, so I could clearly hear all of this going on. I quickly turned the little lock on the doorknob just in case they did make it into the basement. My heart was practically jumping out of my chest. I'm talking to the 911 dispatcher as my 8-year-old cousin clings to my arm. The operator is calm and trying to calm me, but I knew it would be at least 30 minutes until a police officer could get up there, assuming that they didn't get totally lost on this mountainside in the pitch dark. I just kept thinking, we're fucked. We're dead. This is how I die. The operator asked for the number my aunt and uncle left me so she could have another dispatcher call them to let them know about the situation. I turned around to grab the paper with the number on it, and to my absolute horror, I see a man peering in the large sliding glass door. A huge, burly, what had to have been a 6'4" man with long scraggly red hair and a big red bushy beard. And what made it worse, he was grinning at me, grinning in a way that still scares me to this day. Meanwhile, I had to have looked like a terrified deer in the headlights. I was shaking so hard that I could barely hold the phone. There was a second man behind him I couldn't see as well. I have no idea what he looked like, but he was equally as tall, but a bit more lanky than the larger man at the sliding glass door. I screamed, "Oh God, they're here!" And before the 911 operator can say anything, my 8-year-old cousin goes, "Mr. Jim?" His voice was very confused. It wasn't like my cousin was happy or even relieved to see him. I asked, "You know who that is?" But before my cousin can answer, I turn my attention to the man in the door. "I'm on the phone with the police," I shouted. I'm grateful he didn't try that door because I don't think it was locked. The man stared at me for a moment, eyebrows furrowed like deciding what he wanted to do next, but he then just backed away into the darkness. What seemed like an eternity later, I saw the truck lights back out of the driveway and then back down the road until they disappeared. I was still scared shitless, and so was my cousin. He had only met that guy a few times, an acquaintance of his dad. It wasn't like it was a close family friend, and obviously, because again, he went down the wrong driveway. Visitors never go down that way. The 911 operator asked for a description of the man, then told me that they'd gotten in touch with my aunt and uncle, and they were on their way home. She stayed on the phone with me until a police officer showed up a bit later to make sure that the men were gone, and they stayed with us until my aunt and uncle got home so they could ask some questions. My uncle was furious, not at me for calling them home early, but at this Mr. Jim guy. He muttered something like, "I'm going to fuck him up." My aunt was mad at my uncle and told him to tell Jim to never come back again. I didn't know at that time, but my uncle had a drug problem. I don't know what Mr. Jim or his accomplice were doing, or what they would have done if I wasn't on the phone with the police. But that grin was not a friendly one. It was sinister. And again, he also had to have known my uncle was not there, because the basement was dark. He would have seen through the window basement door. He had also tried lifting the garage door, something not even my uncle did. He intended to break into the basement. That much is clear to me. There is no other explanation. I never did babysit for them again, and I don't think I ever went back up there because not long after, my aunt divorced my uncle and moved out. So, Mr. Jim and the grinning burly mountain man who tried to break into the house where I was babysitting, let's not meet again.
I was watching my daughter's kids while her and her husband go out of town. They have a teenage daughter, let's say her name is Alyssa. At about 3 a.m., I'm woken up by a weird rustling sound, and I look out the window and I saw a movement, and I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was that it was a burglar casing houses, but since he looked young and came through on a bike, I figured that scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops straight away, so I went on the porch and flipped the lights on. I then said, "Can I help you?" in my classroom voice. The guy looked surprised but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him, he seemed much older than my granddaughter and looked more weary than athletic. He walked up closer to the door and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I then gave him a disapproving glare, hoping he realized he came looking for a girl late at night, and a grumpy old person answered. I'm thinking what must have happened is Alyssa knew her parents were going out of town, and maybe before she knew I would be staying over, told a secret older boyfriend to come over. It was late and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird that he came so late and wanted to be sure that Alyssa actually wanted to see him, so I then said, "I'm sorry, who?" And then he said Alyssa, you know, Alyssa last name. I then thought if he knew her full name, they must have been at least friends. I then said, "You wait there." He then started walking up. I felt a sick burning sensation in my gut. I then yelled, "No, stop, freeze." I then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. Wait there." So I go in and Alyssa is sleeping just one room over from where the rustling first occurred. I then wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know what the big idea was to have a friend over this late, but you need to tell them to go home." At this point, she had no idea what I was talking about. I then say, "There's a guy outside asking for you." She gets up and goes to the window. She then sees him and goes white as a sheet. She then said, "He asked for me?" I replied, "Yes." "By name?" "Yes." "Call the police. I've never seen him in my life." I immediately called 911. As I was on the phone with them, Alyssa started tugging at my arm and saying, "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it just open enough for the latch and yelled. I asked my husband, and none of us know an Alyssa last name, "Leave my property or I'm calling 911. He then got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and when he heard the sirens, he grabbed the bike and ran off. I watched where he was running towards, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car. The police followed the same direction, but they didn't end up getting him. They advised us to take all of her social media details offline if she was sure that she didn't know this person. They also said they've had a couple similar reports and were looking into it. I ended up getting a heavy-duty lock, and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit.
This happened in August of 2013. I was visiting Montreal for their Diverse Site weekend, which was basically like Pride, but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at that time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone that he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also in the past had a tendency to lose my cell phone, so for about a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. So that Friday night, we went out to a club, Parking, which sadly has since closed, and it was another fun night. The music was great, and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in with my friend and our host. And I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto and ended up taking some MDMA from one of them. We danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat, so I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and pee. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because I have a hard time using the urinal. And once I came out, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked in his mid-30s, on the shorter side and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans and had glasses. I remember thinking when I saw him, he reminded me of an accountant. Not sure why that had popped up in my head. I was pretty sure I didn't hear the door, but I couldn't be sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands. "Hello," he responded. "Are you having fun tonight?" I replied I was, and that the music was incredible, and I was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt. "Do you want to do some coke with me?" he asked. Now, this was not the first time that I have been offered coke in the bathroom at a nightclub, and had done this in the past, and ended up having some good experiences and met some interesting people. So, I was already high and drunk, and not thinking much of it, I said, "Sure, I would love to, thanks." "I just live right near here. It's at my place. If you don't mind coming over, we can do some lines and have a drink and walk back to the club," he replied. Now, obviously, looking back, I realize how very dumb my following actions were, and I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now. But without thinking about it, I agreed and I left with him. The club allowed you to re-enter if you had a wristband, so I didn't worry about that. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, and what parties I had gone to and how old I was and my name. I asked him his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole wall felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were walking. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the 2nd floor, and you had to climb this long narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flick on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking and noticed that he had a carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off, when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside with the key above the regular lock. And in that moment, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread like I have never felt before. The danger that I had possibly put myself in another city, no phone, nobody knows where I am, and now seeing this person locking their door from inside with a key. I just thought to myself that I'll pretend that I didn't see that. I won't take off my shoes and politely hang out for a few minutes, then ask to head back. I also thought that I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was high, but as I looked around, everything inside of me was just screaming that you need to get out of here. I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said that I should take off my shoes and relax. I was getting a better look at him now in the lights of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both of the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was okay and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us drinks, then we could get back. The apartment looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open layout with a living room beside the kitchen and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors painted black, and I could hear music coming from one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt. He said with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You have a very beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some before photos of you before you went back?" Every alarm bell is going off in my head now, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all his Polaroids. And what am I going to do, because that was such a creepy thing to say, and all I can manage is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say sure. Excellent, he says. He then tells me to take off my shoes, and he's going to get the Coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walked down the hall, takes out his keys, and unlocks the second door and opens the door enough to slip in and closes it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up, ran over to the sink and dumped my drink, put my shirt on, which had been tied around the belt loop of my shorts, and I ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door wouldn't budge. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around and he was standing at the base of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back, but we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow. His demeanor slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone when he next spoke sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos and I should just wait for my drink to relax me, and I said no, that I wanted to go. This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute, when he suddenly glared at me, put down the mirror, pointed at the couch and said, "Sit down, now." Not knowing what to do or how I was going to get out of this, I remember that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be 2:30 in the morning at this point. So I started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, and the wall. "Shh! Shut up! Be quiet!" He snapped at me as he ran to the door. He quickly unlocked and told me to get out and stepped aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps, and hopped over the side of the railing. I looked up behind when I landed, and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to walk, but I knew it was close, and luckily, I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to the bar, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. The whole incident must have been less than half an hour. I was too embarrassed about how stupid I had been, and being back in the club, I started to feel bad that I had just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything. But I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered and trying to make light of it because it was so scary. And it wasn't until years later, after joining Reddit and the sub and reading other stories, that I started to think about that night more and more, and realized how much potential danger I put myself in. So, strange man from the bathroom that lured me to his place and wanted to take before photos of me, let's not meet ever again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my following patrons: Fire05, Gabriel, Maskino, Ralph, Lori, and Jake. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.